I would be extremely concerned if someone, especially a client, was asking me to use my line of credit to finance their house. Welcome to Curious Builder Podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. Today, we are going to do two questions for our Thursday Q&A. So one of the questions that was pitched to us was basically, how do you effectively manage cash flow and overhead during the pre-construction phase of a custom home project when there's a little fee revenue coming in, assuming that this is a cost plus build? It's a great question. I think the first step is realizing that we as builders should be charging for pre-construction. I know early in my career, I've been building for 20 years. Early on, I would do bids. I would do a lot of work just because I was looking to, obviously get the job. And I was doing that work for free. Now, obviously, if I had an architect involved or a draftsman, they had to pay for those fees, but I didn't have a contract for that time. I just basically would tell them that, if there's a bill come in, you're going to pay it, but I didn't make any money. And you'd sometimes spend months going through this process to figure out whether you could do it or not. So I think step one is making sure that you have a contract for pre-construction agreement. So mine is pretty simple. It's a two-page document, and really, for me, it highlights just a few things. One is, I have a survey. If I'm doing either a remodel or a new home, I'm going to need a survey, and so I'm going to put an allowance in there for what I think the survey is going to be. I'm going to have in there some interior design dollars. If I'm going to maybe have the interior designer start working on selecting things, I'm going to have to pay that interior designer. So I'll often talk to the interior designer ahead of time and say, how many hours is $5,000 going to get me, or 10,000? This is very dependent on what job you're bidding. So I'll put that in as a placeholder, and then a description of services. I'll also have, maybe architectural designer. If it's a remodel, maybe I'll keep it in house, meaning I'll obviously hire an architect or a designer, but that contract will be between myself and the draftsperson or the architect or the home designer, because maybe it's smaller in scale, and just keeping it simple for the client. Usually, if I do a new home, I'll make it very clearly defined that I will interview a builder or an architect. I'm sorry, I'll interview an architect or two based on what their needs are. They will pick the architect. I'll be at that meeting as well, so I'll be part of it. And then that contract will exist outside my scope of work. And then I'll have a flat fee. You could either do a flat fee or an hourly fee for your time during this pre-construction time. And so really what I tell the client is that this is the time that you really get a chance to know us as a team and our company, as well as allows us to get a chance to know you. And, that could take anywhere from 3, 4 months to 6 months, 8 months, depending on how big the home is. We had one home where it was a year long in design. In hindsight, I should have charged more for my time, but at least I charged for it for a flat fee. I think one thing to also note is you could do this a couple different ways. One is you could have a flat fee that you're going to make, and then bill it like a retainer. Maybe every month you take a deposit. I think that's the key part. So you're going to take a deposit on this initial design retainer. I usually do 60 to 70% upfront, and then 30%, before I pitch the pricing to the client. I have found in the past that I don't like to wait to submit a bill to the client, because I don't want them thinking about money or owing me money after I've just pitched them what the house is going to cost. Right now they're absorbing a lot of information. So I feel like if they can pay, or at least have that retainer money out before that meeting, they're not really thinking about it in that moment. Because I think we've all been there as builders before, that if you submit a bill right after you've just pitched, hey, your project is, 100,000, 200,000, $1 million, whatever it is, over budget, they're not going to take very kindly to also being like, oh, by the way, you owe us $3,000 on your retainer to get us caught up. So I usually will bill early and often, and whatever your cadence is. I tend to just like flat fees. So I'll say, pay this to me up front, and then we'll begin our work. Now, I won't actually begin any of these things until I've been paid, until they've signed a pre-construction agreement. I think that's good. One switch that I made about 2 years ago, and this is kudos to the Contractor Coalition, is, I used to always think that I had to credit this design deposit towards the future build of the house. So for this example, let's just say I took down a a $20,000 retainer for the pre-construction, just for an example. And let's say the house ends up being, 2 or 3 million. I used to in the past, I would take that 20,000 and I would apply that against my general conditions or my profit margin for when I built it. And I just thought that's what you had to do. It just seemed logical to me anyway, that, hey, homeowner, it was very easy. Clients signed that deal all day long. And it was really just insurance that if they didn't build with us, then that money would stay ours. And it was highlighted to me that essentially now I'm working for free. So for those 6 months, yes, I'm getting the money up front, but I'm essentially doing all that work for free. And that's real work. And, think of, I think, for myself, I lead all the sales on my team. And so it'd be easy for me to think, well, this is part of sales. But I think that like if you are getting into the weeds, into the bidding, and you're getting into design and you're having these meetings with these architects, this all takes your time and it's going to take you and you want to be present, and that's fine and that's good. And I think that's what it should be. However, you need to be paid for your time. You're the owner of your company. And so if you are choosing to be in those situations, you should be paid for it, because right now you can't go and get another job while you're in these meetings. And so about a year and a half ago, I switched it in my contract, just really simple verbiage. It just simply says it shall not be refunded towards the future build. And some clients will push back on that a little bit, maybe 2 and 10. And so you just explain to them like, hey, for the next 6 to 8 months, I am really working on your project. And if you decide not to build with me, these plans, these specs, what we've done, like this is yours. And you could have somebody else build it. It'd be like, paying a car company, a design fee to design your car, but not actually build it, and then go have a different company build the car. I think the principle's still the same. You need to be paid for your time. So that's how we manage our cash flow during that pre-construction phase. And if you're incurring costs, I would rather take the money up front. So if I think surveying is going to cost me 2,000, 2,500, I'll put the retainer at, let's say, 3,000. I'll collect all of that up front in that initial down payment. And then that way I can just pay the survey invoices right away. And then at the end, if I can credit them something at the end when we sort of like end that contract and start another construction contract, then it just makes it really simple. And who doesn't like to get a little money back? They've probably already forgotten they've spent it. You write them back a check for $300 or $500. It just also illustrates to them that you're keeping track of your dollars, you're keeping track of their dollars, and it really puts them at ease. So I found that that's probably the easiest way for me to manage cash flow during that time. As far as, I think the question was speaking more to overhead, I think if you are going to charge your people's time, so let's say you have a project manager or a site manager or an estimator, I think you have to look back at your history and find out, hey, if I have an estimator, how many hours is he going to spend on this? Is it 5 hours, 10 hours? Find out what his, hourly rate is. And I would factor that into, either your flat fee or, you could have a line item right in your design contract that spells out my estimator is this much an hour. We anticipate that during pre-construction, he is going to, accumulate 25 hours. My project manager is going to have, 20 hours, and here's his rate. I kind of like that. If you're going to have other people in your company, if you're going to try to overcome your overhead, I think that's a great way to do it. But you still should have a profit margin, or in my case, I just do a flat fee. It's not based on a percentage. Just saying, hey, for me to do this, it's 5,000, 7,000, 8,000, 10,000. Whatever. It has to be relative to your job. So it's kind of hard to answer. But I think if you have people involved, you're paying their salaries. You cannot not be reimbursed for that. And that is absolutely a pre-construction agreement expense. So I would collect it for it on the front end, or for sure 50%. And then if you want to just update the client for just good optics, you could once a month send them a report and just, like a QuickBooks balance statement or an adaptive balance statement that just simply says, hey, we've taken $25,000, we've spent 5,000, show them where it is. I think that in some ways it'll just show how professional you are. It'd be a great opportunity for you really to sell them before you present to them, their final contract. I think that'd be an excellent sales tool. If done correctly, it'll show how competent you are and how good you're going to do, when you actually build their custom home. The second question was, is there ever an instance in which a custom home builder should finance the construction of a custom home? And a second part of that question is, should a custom home builder access a line of credit? think this is very dependent on what the goal of the builder is. I think if you are I personally have not done that early on in my career. I shouldn't say that. Early on in my career, I did. When I was at a different strata of home, let's say the house was 5 or 600,000. I would design the house, for the client. This was before I had the pre-construction agreements or any of that. And and they were maybe living in a home. So usually it was a different price point, at least for me. And I would have to charge them. I'd say, my bank is going to charge me a 1% origination fee. We're going to have interest expense. So that the client has to pay for all these things. And you either break them out or you just tell them, like, that has to go into these are always lump sum contracts. And so obviously I built that into the price. That is the cost of borrowing the money, because I personally did not finance with 100% of my own funds to build this example $600,000 home. I would get 20% down, from the client. And then I would go to my bank. I would give them the 20% down. And then I would have a loan at whatever the interest rate was at that time. And I would be paying that monthly against that down payment that they had. That was really the skin in the game. And you have to charge the client for what that is going to be. So I would work with your local bank, come up with what you think your monthly burn rate is going to be and build that into your actual contract and your lump sum. We don't seem to, I have not seen that happen now in about 10 years. And I can't tell personally if that's just because, I've educated our clients beyond that. They're going to save a percent and a half by going directly. It also just means probably less moving parts for me. So I've elected to not do that. And I usually will instruct them to work with a bank of our choosing, or usually they have a bank that they're already working with. And honestly, I would say, and this is a lot to do with clientele, but half of our clients now probably pay cash. So in that case, we just have a title company involved to make sure we have, some redundancies in tracking. But in that case, they're actually not financing it. I think it would also be somewhat dependent if you're a developer. So if the person who asked this question is maybe doing townhomes or villas, or they are doing, a larger scale development, I could see the case where you're packaging the land and the build into a single price. And in that case, I can see why it might make sense to have the builder run all the financing through them. I think the nationals, Lennar, Pulte, a lot of the bigger companies, they do everything, soup to nuts, as they say. And so they've got not only the land development, they've got, sure, they're breaking this out on their internal documents and profit margins, but I think collectively they can make quite a bit of money by self-financing. Because if you could, right now interest rates are, probably 6, 7%, whatever they are. I haven't looked for a short-term loan, but you're gonna have to charge your client, you have some risk in this. And so you should make money on that. I think if you are going to borrow at 6, 7%, you should probably charge 8 or 9% and make a couple percent, on that, because you are really doing them a service. Maybe they don't have the money or the credit. So that I think that's sometimes an example where somebody needs to sell their house at the end. And so you are taking a bit of a risk. At the end of the day, you're going to have their money and their down payment. So they're very unlikely to walk away, but there is some risk there. And so I think it would make sense, if you are going to borrow money on their behalf, you need to be compensated for it. What that rate of return is, I think it's no different than a bank. I don't know why they would just want go to a bank and do it themselves. Because if I'm going to tack on a few percent, especially in a large scale job, if you're doing $2, $3 million, it ends up being, I mean, that's quite a bit of money, 20, 30 grand. So I think in that case, they'd be far better off to do it themselves. So I think this question is probably has a little bit to do with the price point of the home. But again, if you're a developer, I could see how that would be, somewhat advantageous to all parties, frankly. The other question that was kind of associated with this one is, should a custom home builder have a line of credit? I have one, and for 18 years, I never used it. And now I think dipping in and out of kind of the ups and downs with overhead, it is nice to have it. So I would definitely encourage anyone out there to talk to their local bank. And I would make sure that you have a line of credit so that should you need it, you don't have to dip into your personal accounts or, do anything on a personal basis. And your banks certainly will lend you, some money. especially, usually if you can get it so that it's unattached or unsecured, that'd probably be the best. But sometimes they'll secure it against your office or your assets or something like that. But I think it's nice for the float. Personally, I wouldn't want to be using my line of credit to finance a build for a client. And I think that was maybe the spirit in which this question was written, since that was the first part of the question. So let's say you had a large line of credit. I would be extremely concerned if someone, especially a client, was asking me to use my line of credit to finance their house. If a client can't give you, let's say, 20% down, or whatever your bank's going to ask for hard costs, usually it's 20% in our market, but even if it's 30, whatever it is, if a client isn't willing to put that kind of downstroke down and they're asking you to do it, that would be a huge red flag. I'm thinking of like a $3 million home, you know, and you've got several $100,000. If you are going to borrow against your own line of credit, just to get them and plus finance their home, just so that you have a chance to build their home, you're taking a huge risk, because what's your backstop? What's your collateral? So I would not do that if that's in the way that this question was asked. So, hope you found these questions helpful. Again, if you're looking for any questions that you'd like answered, you can reach out to us at mark@mdwilliamshomes.com. You can also DM us on our Instagram handle, the Curious Builder Podcast. You can also comment on any of our social media posts as well. And this will be a reoccurring theme that every Thursday or every other Thursday we'll be posting a Q&A. So thanks again for tuning into the Curious Builder, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening to the Curious Builder Podcast. If you like what you listen to, please give us a 5-star rating and write us a review. It really means a lot. It's a great way for us to just understand what you like about the podcast and what we can keep doing. So like and review, and please share with your friends and family. Find out more at curiousbuilderpodcast.com.